Now, setting outcomes, and I know that some of you have written quite a few outcomes. I'd invite you to keep doing that throughout the week. Now, one of the things that I'm always interested in is how come some people know some of the things that they want, but don't get the results. Because some people, they've set outcomes, but they don't end up getting them. But then there are other people that they know what they want, and they get great results. I was thinking, what's the difference? So I'm sure that having been on this training, you want to be getting the results that you want. Whether it's in business, whether it's for yourself, whether it's in relationships, in whatever area you want to get results. Again, because a lot of people, they want to improve the communication in relationships. And it's interesting that when we're born, now we have this great device within us, our brain and our mind, and we're not given an instruction guide as to how to use it. We have to learn how to do that ourselves. An area that I'm really interested in is sort of teaching children, because children are the future of the world. The next generation is how the world's going to develop. But how many people are really taught about how to communicate, or how to help children to be happy in their lives, to get results in their lives? Now, how do you teach people to form good relationships? Effective in how we communicate at deep levels. So learning how we can communicate with people and really understand about the messages that we give and how people begin to understand those messages. So that's some really powerful areas that I'm very interested in myself in NLP. So one of the things I find with people at the end of the training, they're always surprised at how much their communication skills have developed. So wherever we start, we can move somewhere else. And one of the presuppositions in NLP, it's not one that you have written down here, but it's there are many presuppositions around. One that I quite like is you cannot not influence. So it's impossible not to influence. If you're in a room with somebody else, we're influencing them. Even if you go into a room and somebody's sitting at the other end of the room, you don't know them, but you just sit somewhere, they'll know that you've come into the room in some way. We cannot not influence somebody else. In reality, what we do most of the time is we go around saying things to people and doing things and not really understanding exactly how we do that at kind of unconscious levels. The thing I like about NLP is NLP allows us to communicate at conscious and unconscious levels and understand how we influence people, which allows us to do it with more integrity and ethically. Because the thing is, most of us, and a lot of people out there, communicate in ways that they may not communicate in the best ways to help people get the results that they want. But once you know how to communicate, to influence at unconscious and conscious levels, it means that we start to do things in ways that help people to get the results they want more quickly. And it can be very effective and powerful. One of the first tools I'm going to review is the Principles for Success. So the Principles for Success, it fits in very nicely with setting the outcomes that you've just done. Like I said, what's the difference between somebody who sets outcomes, or somebody who has some outcomes and doesn't achieve them, and somebody who sets outcomes and achieves incredible results? And some of the key differences can come down to the principles for success. And the first thing is to know your outcome. Now, that's what you've just been doing. You've just been writing down your outcomes. And one of the first things we want to do is set outcomes. Because a lot of people don't set outcomes. So if you ask the average person, what do you want out of your life, or what do you want out of your career, a lot of people have never really thought about it. So actually just having an outcome itself is quite a powerful thing. Now it's not enough, we want to do more with it. I'd suggest that when you know your outcomes as well, that you want to write them down. So solidify them by writing them down and reviewing them regularly. And also something that's quite useful is if you set outcomes regularly, it's a great way to focus yourself. And this goes into part of our brain that's called the reticular activating system. So some of you may have heard of this. It's a part of our brain that's developed for survival. And what it does is it notices things that are important to us. And this is in terms of survival. We have to notice, like for example, where we can get food or sort of things that are going to meet our basic needs. But having evolved beyond most other animals out there, we can use it for other things. And times you'll notice this are, if you've ever been to a shop and you've bought something new, and suddenly you go out of a shop and you see loads of people with the same thing, like a car. I remember when I first bought my new Volkswagen Golf. Well, it's not new now, it's a couple of years old, but when I bought it a couple of years ago, I went into the showroom, driving the car out. Before I bought it, I hadn't really noticed many Golfs around. But as soon as I'm out of the showroom, there are Golfs everywhere. Has anybody had an experience like that? You start to notice things that are relevant to our particular interests. And this happens in lots of different things. It happened as well with when my son was born. So I've got a little boy, he's 2. And when he was born, basically we were trying to think about, what names to call him. And we spent ages thinking about, what names should we call him. Anybody got children? Some of you, anybody got children? Maybe 1 or 2. And I don't know if you had this situation when you're trying to think about what to call your children. You go through the list and think, well, I knew somebody at school called this, and I really don't want to call them that because this person was so-and-so. And after a while, we came up with a couple of names, and the one we chose was Gabriel. And Gabriel, the only person I knew called Gabriel was Gabriel Byrne, the actor. But I didn't know of anybody else called Gabriel. Well, the angel Gabriel, but I didn't think of that at the time. But as soon as he was born, and we had a son Gabriel, suddenly we noticed Gabriels everywhere. I went to a film a couple of weeks after he was born, and the main character in the film was called Gabriel. The next film we go to, the main character is called Gabriel, and it was just bizarre. Suddenly we start to notice it. And it's not that suddenly we're necessarily creating this, it's that we start to notice these things that are relevant to us. So it's what we pay attention to. So outcome setting is very important in whatever we're doing. It's not enough, though, to know your outcome. We need to have a level of commitment towards achieving it. And this is our emotional connection to it. Because there are things that we'd like to do. There are things we'd like to do a little bit, but we're not totally committed to it. And if I asked you to look through your outcomes and think about on a level of 1 to 10, 10 being where you're most passionate about doing it, 10 being where you're most committed, what's your level of commitment to achieving this particular outcome? If it's less than about a 6 or a 7, it's unlikely that you're going to do much about it. So when you think about your outcome, you want to be emotionally connected towards doing it. So our emotions are the things that provide our motivation. So we need to get our motivation together. And the motivation comes from things that are called values. And values are things I'll talk a little bit about in the practitioner course. It's more of a master practitioner topic. So it's those deep drives that drive our behaviour. So it's the things that are most important to us. And they're partly unconscious. But what we want to do is we want to know that you're committed to achieving your outcome. And a good question to ask is, why is it so important for you to achieve this? Now, in NLP, we don't use the question why that much, but this is one of the times that it's useful. Because when I say, so why is it important? Why is it so important for you to have this? What happens is we chunk the person up, and we start to find out some of the motivation that underlies it. So, for example, Uma, if I can just ask yourself. So your outcome was to lose 9 kilos, and what else? It was
double my salary.
Double your salary.
My next job.
Okay.
Get a job and then double the salary.
So why is it so important for you to double your salary?
I like money.
Okay.
And I like to use it as a tool to achieve things I want to do in my life.
Okay.
And I want a comfortable life.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't want to worry about the money when I go out with my friends. I just want to have relaxed time and just pay the bill and go home and go to sleep.
Excellent.
But at the moment, I'm not doing that because I haven't got enough money. I'm concerned. I go out. I don't enjoy my night out because I'm thinking, oh, how much is going to bill, and I should have stayed at home, and that sort of conversation goes in my head. Yeah, that's what.
So if you had that outcome, where you had the money, you didn't have the worries, what would that do for you?
What would that do to me is I'll be focused. I'll go out and enjoy the night and then relax, and then next day, whatever I'm doing, I can pay my attention 100% and achieve other things.
Okay.
And if I'm with, say for example, I have my business and life coaching and business coaching, and I can give myself 100% to my clients, and I'm also a mentor to 10 to 14 years old kids, and I can make a difference in their lives because I want to have my stories and my concerns in my life, and I can make a difference to other people. I can give my attention 100%.
Great. And if you can give your attention 100%, what would that do for you?
I'm satisfied.
Satisfied. Excellent. So, and is it Lubitsa? One of your outcomes was to get your boss to pay for the rest of your NLP training. So if you could do that, what would that do for you?
Well, I would feel more confident becoming a coach. And I think I would have a competitive advantage when I go back to my country.
Great. And if you had that advantage when you go back to your country, what would that do for you?
Well, I will feel more confident and more relaxed because now I'm very worried about what's going to happen.
Okay. So with any outcome that we set, when we start to ask questions like, well, what would that do for you? We start to chunk the person up. And this is important because we start to find some of the values that are behind it. Because what we want is not really the sort of a BMW outside or whatever we think we want. What we want is what that will give for us. Now, nobody wants money as such, just for money. Because you don't want to end up just lying in coins for the rest of your life. It doesn't do anything. It's what does money do for you? Well, it might give us freedom. It might give us security. So it's what that does for us. And people can have the same outcome, or what sounds like the same outcome, but it can be very different underneath it. For somebody, somebody says, I want to have more money. For somebody, that's a very minimal salary, whereas for other people, it's a huge salary. But it depends on, what does that give for us? So it's really important, the drive behind our outcomes. And when I'm working with a client, one of the first things I want to do is I want to find out how much do they want it. Because if they're not really committed, I either need to help them get committed, or they need to set a different outcome. Because we have so many things we want to do in life, it's like, how do we possibly achieve all of those things? So it's about thinking what we really want and why it's so important. So a couple of questions here are, so with your outcome, why is it so important for you to have it? And if you had it, what would that do for you? A couple of useful questions. And in a moment I'm going to get you to work in pairs just to find out a little bit about that with each other. The next step is take action. Now this might sound obvious, but a lot of people, again, they know what they want, they really want it, but they don't do anything about it. And sometimes it's things like fear that stops us, or other things that stop us. Sometimes we just don't really know what to do.
I'm stuck there.
Okay.
Yeah, I set a goal, I have millions list, and the fear stops me, and I don't take action. I go out and do exactly opposite what I'm supposed to do, move away from my list, and do exactly opposite what I should do. I waste my time, I don't have velocity. That's one of the things I want to shift there.
Yeah, and that's one of the things, is, as well as just going through this, in order to do all of this, the rest of the training is designed to help you with this as well. So at the moment there might be fear that's stopping you, and don't think, well, just doing this is going to necessarily change it. Although for some people it does begin to shift it. But we're going to do lots of stuff throughout the course as well about how to manage your mind and your emotions so that you can actually do that. But taking action is really important, and we might need to take big action. So basically, I've also heard about some personal development courses and some trainings out there that just say, all you need to do is imagine your outcome and it will appear to you. Which I think is a nice principle. But at the same time, does it always work? It probably doesn't always work. It may help. We start to focus our direction. But taking action certainly helps us to get there more quickly. So taking action is very important. Sensory acuity is the next stage. So once you've taken action, one of two things is going to happen. Or maybe one of three things. You're either going to get closer to your outcome, or you're going to get further away, or you're going to stay in the same place. And that's really useful. Because if we notice we're getting further, then take more of that action, and we're likely to get further towards our outcome. If you notice yourself getting further away, that's also really useful information, because it means do something different so you get nearer to your outcome. So the feedback is essential. And the way that you get the feedback is through sensory acuity. And later on today, we're going to do some exercise in improving your sensory acuity. And that's noticing the things that are going on around you, noticing the feedback that comes to you. And feedback is one of the most important things that we work with in NLP. It's noticing the results that we get, noticing the things that happen and using that as feedback. Once we've got that feedback, if we notice that we're not getting towards our results, then we need to have behavioral flexibility. So change what you're doing until you get the results that you want in your life or for your outcome. And you may need to keep changing what you're doing until you get closer towards those results. So it's about behavioral flexibility. The more flexible you are in your behaviors, the more likely you are to get your results. And what tends to happen is, most of the time in our lives, we have a comfort zone. So these are the actions that I'm comfortable taking. So we have a comfort zone. It's like, for example, like this boundary around us. And these are the things that I'm happy to do. But in order to get beyond where you are currently, you may need to extend your current comfort zone. Which means being able to take actions which, in the past, we might not have done. But when you start to do them, you get different results. Now, there's a classic story in NLP which has been turned into an advert recently. An advert for, I can't remember what it's for. It's where the lady goes into a supermarket and her child starts to have a tantrum in the supermarket. And she throws herself on the floor and has a bigger tantrum than the child. And this is a classic story in NLP. It's been used a lot in NLP because someone was on an NLP training, it must have been about 20 years ago, and actually went through this process. Her child was a tantrum in the supermarket, so rather than tell the child off, she threw herself on the ground. And the child was so shocked, didn't know what was going on, they were completely stunned and broke out the tantrum. And it works, it really does work. With my little child, he's 2, he doesn't really throw tantrums, but occasionally he gets upset about something. And so if I pretend to be upset in just the same way, he starts looking at me and just laughing. It's a great way of breaking him out of it. It interrupts the pattern. So sometimes by taking action that in the past would have felt uncomfortable with, in the future, as you do that more and more, you'll start to feel comfortable doing that. And again, it's about achieving results for ourselves and helping other people to get the outcomes that they want. Okay. So behavioral flexibility is very important. And the last stage, which is operate from a physiology and a psychology of excellence. So the physiology of excellence and the psychology of excellence involves 2 things. First of all, it's about finding people who are already achieving the results that we want to achieve, and finding out how do they do that. How do they think? How do they use their physiology? Now, there's a major part in NLP called modelling. It's quite a big component, which is a master practitioner topic. It takes a few days just to go through the basics for it. You start to learn some of the skills at practitioner level. But that's about finding out how people produce results at a very deep level. So how they move their physiology, their beliefs, how they think. If you can find all of that from somebody else, we can accelerate our learning incredibly. So it's a very useful thing to be able to do. It's also about putting yourself in the right state. So when you want to take action on a goal, if you can be in charge of the way that you think and your emotional state, you're going to find it much easier to achieve the results that you want. If you think about in terms of going for an interview, for example, if you think about the interview before the interview and you start to run through everything in your mind that could go wrong, when you get to the interview, you're not likely to be in a great state. Do you think you're likely to perform as well as you could at the interview? No, it's pretty unlikely. But if you can be in charge of your emotional state, so you can feel confident, you can run through things just the way you want to, when you get there, you'll be in a different state. And our state is very important because it leads to our behavior. And it's always interesting that a lot of the times, people experience something in a day that goes wrong, and rather than let it go, they run through it again and again and again. A week later, they keep running through this movie of it's not bad enough for it to happen once. We have to run through it and keep running through it. People do some bizarre things. We're going to go through some techniques as well which can help us to begin to change some of that. So we're more in charge of our mental processing and also our emotional state.